And just really want to start out with a personal perspective about what DEI means to you personally. Why is DEI important to you personally?
Well, I'll give you, maybe if you'll permit me, two reasons why DEI is important to me. First is a very personal perspective. I come from an immigrant family in the U.S. after being born in Vancouver and living first there when my father was a professor at UBC. We moved as a family to two American cities, to Philadelphia, where my father was a professor at Penn, and then to Baltimore, where my father was a professor at Johns Hopkins. And there have been some books written about our family recently, one by my brother, Ken Ono, who's a mathematician. And it talks a little bit about what life was like for us growing up as kids and in high school. And we grew up in primarily white middle-class neighborhoods, and feel very privileged to have done so. But we also experienced some systemic racism targeted at us within schools and in the neighborhoods. And so the first answer is that having been a target of racism as a kid, I know how much it hurts and how much it gets in the way of a young person or a young adult really achieving at their optimum if they're going to an institution where they don't feel welcome. So the first is a very personal perspective. And the second really has to do with what I've seen being a university leader. And I'll talk, this applies for my entire career as a university leader, but I'll talk about my most recent institution prior to coming here to Michigan, and that's the University of British Columbia. Many of you know, embarked on an effort to look at systemic racism at that university, which is a fantastic institution. This is not a criticism of that university. Systemic racism exists at every university. But I would say, for me, what really became very profoundly affecting, brought home the impact of racism to me, was looking at what happened with respect to indigenous people at that university, in that province, and the role the university played in perpetuating systemic racism. And as you know, that institution its main campus exists upon the unceded territory of the Musqueam people, and that subsequent campuses were also situated on the unceded territory of different First Nations. And I would say, and as you know, what happened was that those lands were taken through colonialization. The university was founded and established, and it's a wonderful thing that this institution exists on that land. But as you know, through the Truth and Reconciliation process, we are now aware of the harm that was caused by that. And in leading the University of British Columbia, I had a chance to get to know generations of families that have experienced systemic racism in the schools and where they can live, and the processes and the laws. And in fact, it's essentially a genocide that occurred where indigenous children were actually removed from their families, educated in residential schools. And many indigenous children, many women, children are missing and murdered. So one of the first things I had to do was to come to grips with the fact that an institution I was very proud of had participated in that, not directly, but by not really intervening in what was happening and apologizing to survivors of residential schools. And so in that process of leading that institution, coming to grips with what had happened historically, but also looking at systemic racism that still could persist today in institutions, but also in institutions that are, where, for example, in the health professions or the hospitals, where graduates of the university now work, where through a study called In Plain Sight, we were able to clearly show that systemic racism against indigenous people still exists within those hospitals. That really, to me, clearly illustrated the need for universities to take a leadership role in addressing those wrongs. So those are two reasons why these efforts are very important to me personally.